Kumwana was not just any village. It was a place where wealth and family names decided who was respected and who was ignored. People lived with pride, and gossip traveled faster than the wind. In Kumwana, a person's worth was not judged by kindness or truth, but by how much land they owned, the clothes they wore, and the strength of their family name. If someone fell out of favor, the whole village would talk about it before the sun even set. In one quiet corner of this proud village lived Aita, a young woman with a gentle heart. She was not born into riches, but she carried herself with dignity. Her neighbors admired her smile and the way she treated everyone with respect, but they also knew that life in Kumwana could be cruel to someone like her. To the villagers, Aita seemed ordinary, but her story was about to turn into something extraordinary, something people would whisper about in every marketplace and every courtyard. No one knew it yet, but the woman they saw as simple and quiet was about to walk through a fire that would either destroy her or turn her into the strongest voice Kumwana had ever heard. Would you like me to now continue with 2? A marriage without peace in the same style and about 200 to 250 words? When Aita married Otieno, many in Kumwana thought she was the luckiest woman in the village. Otieno came from a wealthy family, the kind of family whose name carried weight in every gathering. His home was large, his lands were many, and his pockets were never empty. On the outside, it looked like a marriage most women would dream of. But behind those walls, Aita discovered the truth. Wealth without kindness feels like a prison. Otieno was not a man of warmth. He never offered her a smile that came from the heart. Instead, he found fault in everything she did. If the food was too salty, he shouted. If she greeted his friends with what he thought was too little respect, he insulted her in front of them. Even the way she sat, the way she walked, or the clothes she wore, nothing seemed good enough for him. Each day became a test she could never pass. Aita tried at first. She thought maybe patience would bring peace, maybe if she showed him more care, his heart would soften. But it only grew worse. The man she had married used his wealth and his family's pride like weapons to keep her small. What hurt her most was not just his words, but the way he made her feel invisible, like her voice did not matter. She could be in a room full of people and still feel like she was standing alone. Nights in that house were heavy. Sometimes Aita cried silently into her pillow, hiding her tears from everyone. She wondered if this was the life she was meant to live, a life of endurance and quiet suffering. But deep inside, even as he tried to break her spirit, a small fire refused to die. She carried her pain in silence, but her silence was not weakness. It was the beginning of strength waiting for the right moment to rise. Do you want me to continue with 3? The controlling family, 350 to 400 words. In the same simple, emotional, viral style? From the very first day Aita stepped into Otieno's family compound, she felt the weight of their eyes on her. They did not see her as a wife, but as an outsider who had stolen a place she did not deserve. To them, she was not good enough for their son. His mother often looked her up and down, shaking her head as though Aita carried shame in the way she walked. His sisters whispered loudly enough for her to hear, mocking her accent, saying she spoke like someone who had not been raised in a proper home. Even the way she dressed was a target for their laughter. If her dress was simple, they called her poor. If she wore something fine, they accused her of trying too hard. No matter what she did, it was never enough. When she served food, they found fault. When she kept quiet, they said she was proud. When she spoke, they called her disrespectful. Every visit to that compound felt like walking into a court where she was always guilty, and the judges had already made up their minds. Otieno did nothing to defend her. In fact, sometimes he joined in, smiling at their cruel words as if humiliating his wife gave him more power. Aita often returned home from these family gatherings with her heart heavy. She sat alone, remembering how her own family had taught her that marriage should be built on love and respect. But here she was treated like a servant who had to prove herself every single day. Yet deep inside she refused to let their scorn erase her worth. She told herself quietly, "One day they will see who I really am." The controlling family believed they were breaking her, but what they did not know was that every insult was only planting a seed of resilience in her soul. Aita's silence was not surrender. It was the quiet before a storm that would one day shake the very ground they stood on. Do you want me to continue with 4? The Day of Shame, 350 to 400 words. In the same style? The evening had started like many others, with Odeino's family gathered in the big compound, sharing food and laughter. But for Aking it was never laughter, it was endurance. She sat quietly, serving food, pouring drinks, doing everything expected of her, hoping to avoid their sharp tongues. But no matter how careful she was, trouble always found her. That night, Odeino's youngest sister complained about the stew, saying it lacked flavor. It was a small thing, but Odeino's face darkened as if she had committed a great crime. In front of everyone, he slammed his cup on the table, his voice rising above the chatter. Aking, stand up. The room went silent. His parents and siblings looked on, some hiding their smirks, others waiting eagerly for drama. Aking's heart raced, but she stood still, her hands trembling slightly. Odeino pointed at her like she was a child caught stealing. "Kneel down and apologize to my family for your carelessness," he barked. The words cut her deeper than any insult before. She had done nothing wrong, yet he wanted to strip her of her dignity. The silence in the compound was heavy, broken only by a few muffled laughs from his sisters. With everyone staring, Aking's knees touched the cold, dusty ground. Her eyes burned with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She lowered her head, whispering an apology she did not owe, her voice breaking as laughter rippled through the family. In that moment, she felt the sharp sting of humiliation pierce her soul. It was not just about kneeling, it was about being made small, treated as less than human. The image of her on her knees was one the family would remember and use against her for years. Yet, deep inside, something shifted. A quiet voice told her, "This moment will not define me forever." The shame they poured on her that night would one day return to them in ways they could never imagine. "Do you want me to continue with 5? A woman's silent tears, 350 to 400 words. In the same emotional A. Aking's knees pressed hard against the cold floor, the dust clinging to her dress as if to remind her of the shame forced upon her. Around her, laughter rang out, sharp, mocking, and cruel. Each giggle and smirk from Odeino's sisters cut her like a blade. She could feel the weight of their eyes, watching her humiliation as though it were entertainment. Her husband stood tall, proud of the power he had just displayed, blind to the pain of the woman beside him. Her eyes filled with tears, blurring the faces around her. She wanted to scream, to rise, to walk away, but the chains of marriage and society held her down. In Kumwana, a woman was taught to endure, to bend, to stay silent for the sake of her husband's pride. But as the salty tears threatened to spill, a voice rose quietly inside her heart. "This moment will not define me forever." That whisper gave her strength. She forced herself to remain still, to hold back the sobs fighting to escape. The more they mocked, the more determined she became. While they saw a broken woman on her knees, Aking knew she was planting the roots of a future none of them could imagine. She told herself, "I will not always kneel. One day they will kneel before the truth." That night, when the gathering ended and the noise faded, Aking walked back to her home with heavy steps. In the silence of her room, she finally let her tears fall freely, soaking her pillow until dawn. But even in that river of grief, her spirit refused to drown. Her tears were not signs of defeat, they were a cleansing, a silent promise that the woman they had mocked would one day rise higher than their laughter. "Would you like me to move on with 6? Whispers in the village, 350 to 400 words. In the same simple, emotional, viral style. By the next morning, the story of Aking's humiliation had already left Odeino's compound and slipped into the streets of Kumwana. Gossip in the village traveled faster than fire, and by midday, everyone had heard how she was forced to kneel before her husband's family. In the marketplace, women shook their heads, clicking their tongues in pity. "Poor girl," they whispered. "Her life will always be full of shame." At the wells, men laughed among themselves, saying Odeino had shown his wife her rightful place. Every corner of the village carried her pain like a tale meant to entertain. Some neighbors looked at her with sympathy, offering soft words when she passed, but their eyes held no hope for her. They believed she was trapped forever, chained to a man and a family who would never value her. Even children repeated the story, mocking her as they played. In Kumwana, once shame touched you, it spread like a stain, and people believed it could never be washed away. But what the villagers did not see was the fire burning quietly inside Aking. She carried herself with calm, even when the whispers followed her every step. She greeted those who pitied her with a smile, even though her heart was heavy. While they thought she was broken, she was secretly gathering strength. She told herself again and again, "I will not be remembered for this moment alone." Aching new pain could either crush a person or push them to rise. And though the village saw her as a defeated woman, she was already beginning to imagine a different future. She would not rush, she would not announce her plans. But one day, the same mouths that gossiped would speak her name with respect. They underestimated her spirit, and that was their greatest mistake. Do you want me to continue with 7? The turning point, 350 to 400 words. In the same emotional and viral storytelling style, Aching knew that if she allowed the night of shame to define her, she would remain trapped forever. But instead of breaking, she made a quiet decision deep in her heart. She would rise. While Otieno and his family laughed at her behind her back, she began to plan a different kind of future. She realized that her silence, which everyone mistook for weakness, could become her greatest weapon. It gave her space to think, to dream, and to prepare without anyone noticing. She enrolled in evening classes at a nearby center, telling Otieno only that she was attending women's meetings. There, she learned new skills, basic accounting, tailoring, and later even small business management. Each lesson lit a spark inside her, reminding her that she was more than the woman they mocked. She was intelligent, capable, and stronger than they could ever imagine. She kept notebooks hidden beneath her clothes, reading late into the night while others slept. Slowly, she started a small business in secret. With the little savings she had, she began selling handmade clothes to women in the village. At first it was just a few sales here and there, but soon word spread about the quality of her work. She stitched not just with thread but with resilience, every dress carrying a piece of her determination. Her customers respected her, even when they didn't know the full story. Each coin she saved was like a stone laid in the foundation of a life she was building in silence. While her husband and his family thought they had broken her spirit, she was quietly rising higher than any of them could see. Aching's silence was never surrender. It was preparation for a comeback that would one day shake the entire village of Kumwana. Do you want me to continue with 8? Building in the shadows, 350 to 400 words. In the same emotional viral style?
Nee, always no be for the hours of the ocean and vital senior herself snow at the life miss. We initiate no. And if I were in a sheen immersed her air for so closer. He didn't get her from your wish. All hours are feeling your ones the wish at last her number. Worth should be stay. And if what it's sealer big or no stander with. He'd aber now you love a hair when the shots gets me asked. I will get the no one other street finger so wish no got milk see, Pepsi. Scarpa for that nits have neighbor Dahnavine. Steph Harperson aimed at a shug in the Dahner leash. My dear friend, she had knife and lighting else a wish. Snell answer had foul though. And I scatter for me it's in Albrecht. And it'll be out so we sure off my either now. Sell sweet nazy hillock. Her non I will it sit. Said when I knew my fs no one I do. And was the vessel flinging my hips up so at ash and then oh, sensible. Yeah, no machine if the schnitzer or own bahish news. Sir, that lost it. Cash name fascinating it. Her with their psul, her help with him with. Stare her method. Works in the Sir Halos. Haler wish near der so upskid a clum siller no anyone. Cecil Berkis name murtahish. English and Vitia wandish. Her echt the Vesischner is no give. He do bis nicker bath for sparks nurse and the thing all in her. And I know maker make you better not my alarms. Still even the name worth spired and it stirks searched it see shale siller at new zernifer. And he shim no sir her what nip. Feel but it's ish. And I keep her worster. Life ya know the. We've stir were no well that her hippie. Fow native bathville or with the elfish head up. He's stand to get foul let be out nike. Her comments be nifty kill my fs no one ace but up. Months passed, and Aching's business quietly grew into something no one could ignore. Her name began to carry respect in Kumwana, though Otieno and his family still refused to see it. Then one day an invitation arrived at their home, an announcement that Otieno's family was hosting a grand ceremony, inviting everyone in the village. The halls would be filled with important people, friends, and neighbors. To the family it was a chance to show off their wealth and status. To them, Aching was expected to play the same role she always had, quiet, obedient, and invisible.
They did not know that Aking had been preparing for this very moment. While they thought she was silent, she had been building her own power, learning how to stand tall even when everyone doubted her. When she read the invitation, a small smile touched her lips. This was her chance, not for revenge, but to claim the dignity and respect that had been denied to her for so long. She began planning quietly, selecting her attire, polishing her words, and imagining the scene where she would walk in not as the woman they mocked, but as someone they could never ignore. On the day of the ceremony, Otieno's family dressed in their finest clothes, thinking the spotlight would shine on them. They had no idea that the moment Aking appeared, all eyes would turn to her. She moved with a quiet confidence, her steps measured, her posture regal. The woman who once knelt in shame was no longer hidden behind fear or embarrassment. She had worked in the shadows long enough to understand her own strength, and now it was time for the world to see it. The villagers whispered as she entered, sensing a change in the air. Aking was no longer the quiet, submissive wife they had pitied. She was a force, a symbol, and the living proof that resilience and determination could turn even the harshest humiliation into triumph. Do you want me to continue with 10? A different entrance, 350 to 400 words. In the same emotional Vera. When Aking stepped into the grand hall that day, every eye turned toward her. She was no longer the timid woman who had knelt in shame months ago. Her posture was straight, her steps confident, and her eyes held a calm power that made even the loudest voices pause. She wore a royal African gown, rich in color and embroidered with gold threads that caught the sunlight streaming through the windows. Her head was held high, crowned with a beautifully wrapped headscarf that spoke of tradition and dignity. She moved like someone who knew her worth, and for the first time, everyone in Kumwana could feel it. The hall, which had been buzzing with chatter and laughter, fell silent the moment she entered. Otieno's family froze. His mother's hand trembled slightly as she clutched her pearls, and his sisters exchanged quick, uneasy glances. The people who had laughed at her, mocked her, and dismissed her now had no words. Aking's presence alone commanded respect. The villagers whispered to each other, astonished at the transformation they were witnessing. She did not rush to her seat. Instead, she walked slowly, deliberately, allowing everyone to take in her grace and strength. Each step was a quiet declaration. She was no longer someone to be belittled or ignored. Every stitch in her gown, every fold of her scarf, and every glint of gold jewelry told a story of resilience, patience, and triumph. The woman who had endured humiliation in silence had emerged into power, and the room could not deny it. Aking's entrance was more than a physical step into a room. It was the moment her life began to rewrite itself. She was no longer defined by shame or by the cruel words of her husband and his family. In that moment, she became the center of attention not because she demanded it, but because her dignity, strength, and quiet determination radiated so powerfully that it could not be ignored. Do you want me to continue with 11? The stunning revelation, 350 to 400 words. In the Sam. As the ceremony moved forward, the room was filled with music, laughter, and polite conversation. People sipped drinks, clapped politely, and exchanged compliments, all unaware that the true moment of shock was about to come. Then, an official stepped forward, holding a stack of documents and a microphone. The chatter faded instantly as he cleared his throat. "We have an important announcement regarding one of Kumwana's residents," he began. All eyes shifted toward Aking, who remained calm, her hands folded gracefully in front of her. The official continued, "Aking, formerly the wife of Otieno, is now the legal owner of several major businesses and land across Kumwana. These holdings include trade companies, real estate, and farmland that surpass the wealth of many families here, including hers." Gasps filled the room. Women clutched each other's arms, men exchanged stunned glances, and even Otieno's proud parents froze, their mouths open in disbelief. Aking's calm gaze swept over the room. She was no longer the woman who had knelt in shame months ago. Each person who had dismissed her now had to face the undeniable truth. She had worked quietly in the shadows, investing her time, effort, and courage, and she had succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. The room that had once laughed at her now trembled with awe. Otieno shifted in his seat, his face pale. He opened his mouth perhaps to speak, but no words came. His sisters whispered urgently to one another, unable to comprehend how the woman they had mocked had risen so high. Aking's quiet strength, Her patience and her resilience had transformed into a force that could no longer be ignored. As the official finished reading the announcement, the murmurs grew into applause. Not loud celebratory clapping, but a deep respectful recognition that Aking had earned what she now possessed. The woman who had been humiliated in front of an entire family had become a symbol of empowerment, a living proof that P. Otieno and his family sat in stunned silence, their faces drained of color. For the first time in months, the air around them felt heavy, not with laughter or pride, but with shock and disbelief. His mother's hands trembled as she clutched her necklace, and his father stared straight ahead, unable to find words to explain what was happening. His sisters whispered urgently to each other, their voices tight with confusion. The woman they had ridiculed, mocked, and forced to kneel before them was now standing above them in every way that truly mattered. Otieno opened his mouth, intending to say something, but no words came. He looked at Aking, hoping to find some trace of the timid woman he had thought he knew, but all he saw was strength, dignity, and a calm that made him shrink inside. The same hands he had once used to control her, the same pride he had flaunted in front of the village, now seemed powerless against the reality of her success. She had transformed while he was busy belittling her, and there was nothing he could do to take it back. The whispers in the hall had turned into murmurs of astonishment. Guests who had once pitied Aking now looked at her with admiration. They saw a woman who had endured humiliation, built her own path in silence, and emerged more powerful than anyone could have imagined. Even the village elders nodded subtly, recognizing that her rise was not luck. It was the result of courage, intelligence, and unwavering determination. In that moment, the power dynamics had shifted completely. The family who had tried to keep her small had been rendered powerless by the very resilience they had ignored. Aking did not gloat or insult. She simply stood tall, letting her presence speak louder than any words. The silence of her triumph was louder than any shouting, and it was a sound that would echo in the memories of everyone present for years to come. Do you want me to continue with 13? A biblical comeback, 350 to 400 words. In the same E. Aking stood quietly for a moment, letting the weight of the room's silence settle. Every eye was on her. The eyes of the villagers, the guests, and most of all Otieno and his family. They could not look away, for in her calm stance and unwavering gaze lay a power they had never anticipated. Then with a voice steady and strong she spoke. "The stone you rejected has become the cornerstone," she said, each word deliberate, each syllable carrying the weight of every insult, every humiliation, and every tear she had endured. The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. It was as if the room itself had paused to listen. Some gasped. Others whispered to themselves, realizing the depth of what she had just declared. Aking did not shout or point fingers. She simply reminded them of a truth they had forgotten. Those they tried to suppress could rise stronger than their oppressors. Her comeback was not just clever or defiant. It was almost biblical in its weight, echoing through the hall like a lesson written not on paper, but in life itself. Otieno's family could not meet her eyes. His mother's face had turned pale, and his father's jaw was tight with disbelief. His sisters clutched their hands, unable to reconcile the woman they had mocked with the force standing before them. And Otieno himself, he sank lower into his seat, his pride crushed under the truth of her rise. The wife he had humiliated, the woman he had thought powerless, was now the center of authority, respect, and admiration. The villagers whispered among themselves, awe spreading across their faces. Women who had once pitied Aking now looked at her as a beacon of hope. They saw in her the power of resilience and dignity, and the truth that humiliation is not the end of a story. It can be the beginning of a triumph so great it leaves everyone who doubted you in shock. In that hall, Aking's words were more than a comeback. They were a declaration that strength, patience, and courage can transform. Otieno sank lower into his chair, his head bowed, feeling a weight heavier than any he had ever carried. The pride he had flaunted, the arrogance that had made him think he could control Aking, now felt like a crushing burden on his shoulders. Every mocking word, every cruel order, every time he had forced her to kneel in front of his family replayed in his mind like a cruel echo. For the first time he understood the depth of his mistakes, not just to his wife but to himself and the entire community. He looked around the hall, seeing faces that had once admired him or at least respected his family name, now looking at him with pity or quiet judgment. The same woman he had humiliated, the one he had thought powerless, now commanded respect, admiration, and authority that he could never take from her. She had risen while he had wasted his time in cruelty, and the reality was unavoidable. He had lost. Otieno's sisters whispered nervously to each other, sensing his shame. His parents exchanged silent glances, finally seeing that their son's arrogance had blinded them as well. And all around, the villagers who had once pitied Aking now watched with awe, witnessing the complete reversal of power. They saw a man humbled, forced to reckon with the consequences of his pride, and a woman elevated, proof that courage, patience, and resilience always prevail. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to undo the years of humiliation, but he knew some wounds could not be erased with words. He had underestimated her, dismissed her strength, and assumed that wealth and family pride were enough to keep her small. But Aking had shown him and everyone present that true power comes not from control or status, but from integrity, perseverance, and a refusal to be broken. In that hall, Otieno learned a lesson he would never forget. The man who had thought he ruled over a wife, a family, and a village now hung his head, quietly accepting that he had been defeated by the very woman he. From that day forward, Aking walked through Kumwana with her head held high. She was no longer the quiet, timid woman who had knelt in shame. She had become a symbol of strength, courage, and dignity. Villagers who had once pitied her now looked at her with admiration, inspired by the way she had turned humiliation into power. Women whispered among themselves, sharing her story, realizing that even in the darkest moments, they too could rise. Her business continued to grow, and with it, her influence. She helped other women learn skills, start small businesses, and stand up for themselves in a society that often tried to keep them small. Aking's life became a living lesson. Respect is earned through resilience, and a single act of injustice does not define a person. Even Otieno and his family could not ignore the change. They had witnessed the woman they tried to break rise above them, and the lesson of humility stayed with them. Aking did not seek revenge. She sought only dignity and justice, showing that true power comes from strength of character and patience. Kumwana remembered her story for years. Every child who grew up hearing it learned that humiliation is never the end. It can be the beginning of a new chapter filled with honor and glory. And Aking, who once knelt in shame, became the cornerstone of inspiration, proving that courage and determination could transform any life, no matter how heavy the burden. The story ends not with defeat, but with triumph. The triumph of a woman who refused to stay small and reminded everyone that true strength always rises.